Hello, grade 10s. Welcome to Cell School, and of course, it's Life Sciences. We're in week 12, and this is lesson 1 of week 12. You have already learnt that the cell is the smallest functional unit in a living organism, and you've also learnt that many cells of the same type or structure that are found working together and performing a specific function are called tissues. And all of last week, you looked at a number of different plant tissues. Well, today we're going to continue looking at different plant tissues, and the plant tissue that we're going to focus on today is called xylem. Now, plants need vessels or tube-like cells in order to carry substances around their bodies. We need to remember that plants are going to be absorbing water from the soil, and that the water is in fact needed here in the leaves in order for photosynthesis to take place. This means that some system of transporting water up the plant and into the leaves is necessary. Water needs to be transported along tube-like cells. The water is transported in tissue known as xylem. So xylem is what we call a water conducting tissue. The water conducting tissue, xylem, is found throughout the plant, together in bundles with another kind of conducting tissue known as phloem. Now, tomorrow we will look at phloem in detail, but you need to remember that in the leaves, food is made, and the food needs to get from the leaves to other parts of the plant. And the food is transported in the opposite direction to the water. The food is transported down the plant in phloem. And so the xylem and the phloem are found together, usually, as I said, in bundles of conducting tissue. We find phloem and xylem packed together. But today we're focusing on xylem. We know that there are two different kinds of cells making up xylem tissue. There are cells known as tracheids and vessels. Now, tracheids are elongate cells. You can see that they have tapered or pointed ends. All right? The word taper comes from the word for a candle that has this pointed end. That is a tapered end. We can see that the tracheids have these tapered ends. They're elongated cells. We can see that the walls of the cell walls, have numerous pits in them. The cell walls themselves are very much thickened. Here we can see the other kind of xylem cell known as a vessel. Vessels are also elongated, but they have blunt ends to the cells. We can see they're not tapered, they come to a blunted end, but we can see also that the walls of the vessel are pitted, and they are also very, very thick the cell walls. Now these are not diagrams, these are in fact micrographs. And here we can see a cross section or a transverse section through some tracheids, and we can see that their cell walls are very, very thick. Now, do you remember when we learnt about support cells, we learnt about sclerenchyma and collenchyma? We said that sclerenchyma, the cell walls were thickened with lignin, which is a woody substance. And because the walls are so heavily thickened with lignin in sclerenchyma, remember, the cell contents died. Now, that was because, if you remember, the sclerenchyma cell wall got thicker and thicker and thicker, and eventually the contents of the cell was restricted to a very small area, and in fact the cell died. Now, in the case of xylem, although the cell wall is very, very thick with lignin, it leaves a large open cavity, which remember we called a lumen, which means the opening, the open cavity inside the cell, and it leaves these lumen open. There's no cell contents, and this is because we wish to create, and here we can see it in longitudinal section, we wish to create a series of hollow straws, one on top of the other. And in this way, we're going to be able to draw water up the hollow lumen of the xylem upwards from the roots to the leaves. Now, due to the tube-like structure, we can place these vessels and tracheids end to end, almost like a bundle of straws, getting taller and taller and taller, and in this way we can move water from the roots of the plant right up to the leaves. Now, here in these vessels, you can see that the thickening, the lignin, sometimes appears in patterns. We can get rings of patterns, rings of lignin, all creating interesting patterns on the surface of the xylem cell. In between these vessels and tracheids, we will find parenchyma, and the parenchyma will act as packing tissue to help insulate these cells against each other and to provide the situation where we don't have big spaces in between the cells, which would weaken it or weaken the plant. We need to remember also that as the plant increases in width, remember we have learned that the plant grows upwards and downwards in length, but it also increases in width or in diameter. New vascular cambium, we have learnt about cambium already. Vascular cambium lays down new xylem and new phloem in order to make the plant wider and wider, and each year a new layer of xylem and phloem can be laid down, and what we see developing in plants, particularly in large trees, is what we call annual rings, which are the rings of xylem that are laid down each year. And wood consists of accumulated secondary xylem, or xylem that is laid down year after year after year. Here is your homework question. I would like you to tell me 2 functions of xylem tissue. I think for your first function of xylem, you would have been very eager to say that xylem is water conducting tissue. That is the first and primary or most important function of xylem, is that it is a tissue that conducts water, a water conducting tissue. But what about the second function of xylem? Because xylem has very thick lignified cell walls, similar to the situation that you saw in sclerenchyma, a second function of xylem is that it adds strength, and this will allow it to support the plant as a whole. And this function you can see very often in plants that have woody stems or trunks, as in trees. Trees would never be able to grow as tall as they do if it were not for the strength and support given by the secondary xylem. Tomorrow we will look at the structure of phloem tissue, so do join me again then. But for today, goodbye.